So as we get started, I'm Kyle Feingold. I'm co-founder at Guiding Bright Minds and want to welcome you to the Guiding Bright Minds webinar series. This is webinar 11, titled The Top 10 Strategies for Parenting Children with ADHD and Executive Functioning Challenges. And we're here with Cindy Goldrich today, a certified ADHD coach. She's wonderful, and Cindy, so glad to have you here. So thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Sure.
Before I hand it over to Cindy, I want to give you a little bit of background information on Guiding Bright Minds. So Guiding Bright Minds is on a journey to become the single resource for parents of diverse and neurodiverse learners that have ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, autism, and other differences. So our purpose at Guiding Bright Minds is to connect you with screened and vetted schools and professionals, educate you on symptoms, diagnosis, and treatments available, and then unite parents with families who have similar experiences. So my wife and I co-founded Guiding Bright Minds last November. And our journey, like so many of you, began with personal experiences. For me, I struggled mightily in school. I was diagnosed with dyslexia. I had undiagnosed ADHD. And while it was really difficult for me, and I could go on and on about the challenges, but also the successes I had, it was more difficult for my parents. My parents it was so difficult for my mom in particular to find the resources to support me and where to go and what schools to go and who to hire to help me with my ADHD and my dyslexia. And so, it was quite a journey for my parents. Today, my wife and I, we're raising an incredible neurodiverse learner ourselves. And through the pain and joy of watching our own son struggle, both socially and academically, it's kind of brought to light for my wife and I the need for there to be a resource for parents, created by parents, that supports and helps parents with their journey in raising their incredible kids. So my wife and I know firsthand that nothing is more painful for a parent than seeing their child struggle. So in addition, for the last 17 years, I've had the opportunity to work with incredibly bright and talented children with ADHD, executive functioning deficit, dyslexia, autism, and so many diverse learning styles. And I've seen so many families struggle in their journey to find the right professionals and schools and just guidance on their journey. So my wife and I have created a community that brings parents, professionals, educators, and nonprofits together to embrace, empower, and celebrate our bright children. So again, Guiding Bright Minds, we're striving to be the single destination resource for parents of diverse and neurodiverse learners that connects them with screened and vetted schools and professionals, educates them on symptoms, diagnosis and treatments, and unites parents with families who share similar experiences. So today at Guiding Bright Minds, we're on the ground floor of this effort, and we want to build this platform for you and with you as a community who believes that diverse learners are incredible. So I'm going to include a link to the Guiding Bright Minds free membership, as well as our newsletter in the chat as Cindy gets started. In addition, I'm going to send this webinar to you along with those links and any resources that Cindy shares, so you have those for future reference. I highly encourage you to sign up for our free membership and become part of our community, and then to receive our newsletters, where you'll receive invitations to our webinars every 2 weeks, new vlogs and blogs and articles, all around focused in raising and supporting neurodiverse learners. So our next webinar is actually 1 month from today, with school getting out and kind of making that transition for everybody from the school year to summer, particularly in this crazy year that we've all experienced. We're going to take the next month off, but we'll be back on June 23rd with a webinar titled Autism, Finding Flexibility, Structure, and Support for Parents in Raising Their Incredible Kids. So that is on June 23rd at 12 p.m. Make sure you get an invitation. And our guest speakers for that are professionals and parents from the Temple Grandin School here in Boulder, Colorado. So again, I just want to say one more time, we're going to send you a recording of this webinar. and the appropriate links to Guiding Bright Minds, as well as any resources that Cindy shares as she gets started in her presentation. So the format for today, as Cindy starts her presentation, is she likes to take questions kind of as we go. So when you have a question, instead of putting them in the chat, please use the Q&A. Drop your questions in the Q&A. It'll help us manage all the questions that come in and do as much as we can to answer as many questions as we can. So with that, I'm super excited to introduce you to Cindy Goldrich for our topic today, the top 10 strategies for parenting children with ADHD and executive functioning challenges. So Cindy, thanks so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can all see my PowerPoint. Okay. All right. And I just want to say so much of what you said, Kyle, I truly relate to. I'm going to tell you all just a little bit about myself because I know it's always nice to have a context of who's speaking to you. So I am a mental health counselor, and I'm also a board certified ADHD coach. And if we were able to be with each other in person, I'd be asking all of you, like, how many of you know what an ADHD coach is? And I know from experience, many people don't. So I'm just going to explain very briefly. The field of ADHD coaching is still relatively young, but just as there are life coaches and sports coaches and business coaches, we have found that when you have a child, or you are an adult yourself, or you are struggling with ADHD, it's nice to have someone who's truly knowledgeable, who really understands the social and emotional impact that ADHD has on every aspect of your life. So I originally trained to work with the high school and the college kids, and I quickly found that, you know what? When the parents don't know what the parents don't know, I wasn't always getting very far with the kids. So that's when I made parents really the center of my work, and I developed my own field of parent coaching on its own. I developed my workshop that you see there, Common Connected, Parenting Children with ADHD. I've been doing that workshop for over a dozen years now. I also train other professionals to become parent coaches. So there are people all over the country and other parts of the world that are giving this workshop. My two books, just to distinguish them for you. The first book, 8 Keys for Parenting Children with ADHD, is written primarily for parents. The second book, ADHD and Executive Function, Behavioral Challenges in the Classroom, my daughter, who's a special ed teacher, and I wrote that together to support the gen ed teachers so that they really have some good tools and strategies. Parents also find it helpful. There's lots of handouts and whatnot. So that's really enough about me, except that I want to say in relation to Kyle, what you had said, parents need their own support. This is a hard journey, and that's what this presentation is going to be about. As Kyle mentioned, I'm happy to take your questions as we go. But I want you to feel like there is support out there for you. So let's see where we want to get started. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the challenges that parenting a child with ADHD and executive function offer. And we're going to start with ADHD, the basics and beyond. So we used to call this ADD. If you are still calling this ADD, then you are not current. According to that diagnostic statistical manual, that big manual in the doctor's office, this is all ADHD as of, I think, 1987, right? What did we used to call these kids when we were growing up? These were the kids that were annoying, difficult, spacey, chatty Cathy for the girls, behavior problems, lazy, unmotivated. We had all sorts of names. We now fortunately realize that, you know, a lot of what's going on is that there is ADHD, that there is a neurodiversity in the brain, right? But it is a complex neurobiological condition, and it is highly hereditable, which is why very often when I'm working with parents about their child, I know that, you know, some of those challenges the parents are working on themselves, which is why I sometimes encourage the parents to get support for their own ADHD. And we know that approximately 9.5% of school-age children may be diagnosed with ADHD. Now, what does that mean? That means that in every classroom, it's probably about one kid, which is why I ended up going into doing teacher training as well. I've been going to schools, for the past 10 years, because teachers do not have strong training in ADHD. For sure, they don't have strong training in executive function unless they've done that in the last few years. So what happens is parents are going to their teachers for support, and some of the teachers on their own and through their schools have gotten a lot of training, but many have not. So we have to always understand where we're getting our information from. Also, 85% of adults with ADHD have been undiagnosed. And a lot of people will find that they don't realize about ADHD for themselves until they have a child, right? So, but the debate over ADHD is over. I mean, there's no question. You can see it in the brain. I never suggest spending the thousands of dollars it costs to get a brain scan, because it's not going to give you more information that a good diagnostic workup can give you. And when I say a good diagnostic workup, that's why I think it's so great that Kyle is doing, the organization he is, because there's so many different ways to approach this, but you want to go to an expert who truly is up to date and understands ADHD and executive function. Now, there are basically 3 presentations of ADHD. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we've got the primarily inattentive. We've got the predominantly hyperactive and impulsive. And then, of course, we have the combined type. But with each one of these, you can find those details, but you want to make sure that you understand your child. And that's what's really important, because there's personality, there's temperament, and there's neurobiology. We want to understand how each of these are playing in for your child. So we think of ADHD sort of as an iceberg. There are the things you can see on the top. Now, what do we very often see? We see impulsivity, inattentiveness, hyperactivity. Those are the things that we see. But it's what lies beneath that is so challenging. And one of those biggest challenges is the deficits in executive function skills. Now, I want to give you just a basic understanding of executive function skills. I will tell you that in my Common Connected Workshop series, I spend the first 2 hours doing a very deep dive into ADHD and executive function. So there really is a lot to understand. But basically, your executive function system is located in the prefrontal cortex. That's the front part of the brain. And I always say, here you go, that's your brain, right? So if you take out your fist, here's your thumb, front part of the brain, that's what we're talking about. This is the thinking part of the brain. It has nothing to do with intelligence. Your child could have the highest IQ in the class, right? And still have very weak executive function skills. I want you to think about the very tall kid in kindergarten, right? We expect him to be so mature because he's so big. But in reality, he's really no more mature than the other kids. Same thing. We expect someone who seems to be so intelligent to be able to manage things like organizing, planning, getting started on their work, right? Managing their materials, all of that. We think intelligence relates to that, but it's really kind of separate, okay? And we also know, because we can see this in the brain, as I said, that people can be up to 30% delayed in their executive function skills when they have ADHD. So what does that mean? That means that your child, that you're looking at your 10-year-old and you're just saying, wow, he's so bright, he should be able to. If I said to you, if you tell your child, do me a favor, go upstairs, get your backpack, your shoes, your tennis racket, and on the way down, could you get my water bottle? And by the way, did I shut my light off? And I know I can't see your faces, but having done this for so many years, I know many of you are saying, oh my God, my kid's not going to come down. Or if they come down, it's like with 1 or 2 things. So I want you to think for a moment, what kind of emotion does this raise in you? How many of you are feeling anxious, annoyed, frustrated, exhausted, hopeless, right? And probably a few other things that you don't even want to mention. Well, what if I told you that it's possible that your child has a weaker working memory? Now, if they have a weaker working memory, your working memory is sort of like the search engine in your brain. Okay. It's what allows you to hold on to information, integrate what you're hearing, and then do what you need to do with it. Right. So if you realize that maybe my child has a weaker working memory, then, maybe everything I'm telling him to do, he's just not holding on to all of it. Maybe he's not being defiant or lazy or difficult. And then I get to calm myself down and go into problem solving mode. What would that problem solving mode look like? Well, maybe I can write down a few things for him. Maybe I can break it into a few steps. Maybe I can ask him to repeat it back to me, just not as a test, but to just see, hey, I just want to see if you got everything. If it's a younger child, maybe I'm going to draw some pictures, right? The point is, the more we understand about our own child's challenges, the more we can calm ourselves down and go into problem solving mode and get the support we need to help us and our children develop the tools and the strategies that they need. Okay, so that's just a little bit about how executive function and your knowledge of executive function is crucial in supporting your child.
Cindy, we have one person who asked if you could repeat the list of 3 items that you said about knowing your child. They said personality, temperament, and?
Personality and neurobiology.
Thank you.
And neurobiology, yeah. Because it is really important, right? These things are all important in making up who your child is. And you know, when I mentioned earlier on that there are so many adults who didn't realize that they had ADHD when they were growing up, one of the things we've really seen, especially in women, right? We used to think that the rate of diagnosis was so different, that it was mostly boys, right? And not as many girls. What we have realized is it just shows up so differently in women. So women were very often diagnosed with anxiety or depression. And while those diagnoses may have been accurate, it's very possible that what they were dealing with was undiagnosed, untreated ADHD. So once they frame and learn more about themselves, it really shifts their outlook on their lives. I know so many women who have either gone back into starting careers or have just taken on different responsibilities with more confidence, because now they're saying, you know what, maybe I just need some of these tools and strategies.
Yeah, and Cindy, to your point, one of our questions that came in is, you know, you gave that stat about how many kids are actually diagnosed, and how many do you think are undiagnosed? And what do you think the total percentage of people out there with ADHD is? And I know it's going to be a swag, but it'd be interesting to learn that.
That's a great question. People, I'm going to frame it a little differently and I'll answer it. People very often ask me, you know, do I think ADHD is overdiagnosed? My answer is yes, but I also think it's underdiagnosed, mostly because it's misdiagnosed. Until, and this is another whole conversation, something I'd love to work on, until we reach a point where we have an agreed upon method for diagnosing ADHD. You know, a lot of people think, well, can't I just go to the internet, right? There's all these checkoff lists and everything else. So until we really are doing proper diagnosis, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, it is hard to know. What's my gut? I look at it this way. If I said the word spectrum, I know many of you immediately out there are going to think of autism. Let's put autism on the side for the moment. I want to reclaim that word spectrum. I think we're all on a spectrum. I think we all have our strengths, our weaknesses, and everything else. So in terms of that ADHD piece, I do think that it probably is a little bigger than that statistic is showing. But I don't worry about that because I don't look at ADHD as a deficit. I know it's called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I don't think of it as a disorder. I don't think of it as a deficit. I think of it as a difference with inherent challenges. And those challenges are real, right? But listen, I am geographically challenged. I have now lived in Boulder, Colorado for 3 years. I'm from New York. I still need my GPS to get everywhere. I just can't hold on to things on my map. But that's not an actual diagnosis. I don't have to worry about shame or anything else. we have to get over some of these labels if they're holding us back, but use them if they're helping us get services and support. So that was a long-winded way of answering your question, Kyle, but hopefully that gave some information for you.
Absolutely, that's perfect. Thank you.
So the other thing that lies beneath is the deficits in emotional self-regulation. I know many of you are here today, not because your kid is disorganized or, doesn't pay attention all the time, but because you're just so frustrated because your kid is that kid who goes 0 to 100. And oh my God, I can't even talk to him now. And that's what we work on. That's why my workshop, by the way, is called Calm and Connected, because I know that we need to start calming all of that down, but we need to help them learn how to regulate their emotions. And that's something I think parents are in the best position to do. That's the support we need to give them. But there is an understimulation of the reward in the brain when it's bored. We know that, right? And that's why, fidgeting is so important. That whole concept of fidgeting is actually activating the brain. But what happens? Kids get in trouble because they're making too much noise with their fidget or they're breaking their fidget. So I'm going to teach you something real basic. Let's say this pen was my fidget, okay? And let's say I was alone and I could just be doing this all day long and doing my work and I'm fine, right? But if I was sitting next to you, would this drive you crazy? Probably, right? That noise. So a few things we want to teach kids. The first thing is it your primary focus or your secondary focus? If I'm doing this and I'm still working, I would say it's in the background. It's my secondary focus. It is a tool. But if I take this and I say, wow, this is so cool. It's got this little clip here and some ridges here. Then it became my primary focus, right? This is now, in essence, a toy. So we want to help kids distinguish the difference. We don't want to just take something away because their need did not go away. And in fact, when we don't allow them to take care of their needs, that's when either they are falling asleep and getting spacey on us, or they're annoying everybody, right? They're not doing what they need to do because they're just trying to scratch that itch. Let's give them the tools to do that. If anyone wants, that is an article that's on my website, which is PTS Coaching, which, by the way, stands for Pathways to Success, because I think everyone's got a different pathway. But that's an article on my blog, or you could just email me and I'm happy to send you the article. And Kyle, maybe in the notes, you can also just send out, obviously, my email address. But I will tell you, I also have a newsletter. So if you want to sign up for that, you could do that too. I'm always sending out articles and whatnot. But at any rate, so understanding a child and how they need to best pay attention is crucial. All right. Now,
Cindy, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to your website right into the chat. So
sure,
it's
that's
available
great
for everybody.
Absolutely. And you can put my email too in case they, have follow-up questions.
Sounds great.
So if I was in front of all of you, I would be asking you right now, any of your kids spend way too long in the bathroom? And I know from experience, a lot of you are shaking your heads and saying, yep. And now my next question is, how many of you have a clock in the bathroom? Because the reality is every time we are going to expect our child to pay attention to time, we must give them a tool to measure the passage of time with. I'm going to show you a tool that I really like. And you can find this as resources on Amazon. You can find a link on my website, actually. This is called a time timer, okay? And you see this red? You set it for whatever you want. Let's say I set it for 15 minutes and said, okay, Charlie, you got to come down for breakfast in 15 minutes. Because when you say that to a child, do you think they actually look at the time and say, okay, Mom, let's go down, pay attention, I'll be down in 15 minutes. They're not. So this way you give them a visual representation. And this clock, by the way, comes in all different sizes. You can get it as an app on your smartphone. In the schools, they have it as an app on the smart boards, right? But this way, they're seeing the passage of time, and that's very different. And at the end, it just goes bing, right? Now, I know some of you are also saying, but my kid gets so anxious. If I give them a timer like this, they're going to throw it across the room. That is a parenting issue. We have to separate the idea of tools that can be helpful and helping our kids use helpful tools, right? So this is some of the work that we do in the parent coaching to help our kids be open to these things, right? To deal with their anxiety, etc. So one thing we also know about ADHD and time is that the concept of time is actually fluid and developmental, but people with ADHD, whether or not they're on medication for ADHD, their sense of time is not as accurate as people without ADHD. Interesting, right? Answers a lot of questions for you probably, right? So, you may know someone, maybe yourself, your kids, whatever, who's always late and always surprised, right? That's what this is. So we have to think more clearly about time. So that's what that time timer is about. So my first strategy is get fully educated. As I said, this is just a little bit of what you need to know to understand the social and emotional impact that ADHD and executive function have on learning, motivation, behavior, and I would say also on the whole family system, right? We are a family system. So number 2 is diagnosis and treatment. A proper diagnosis, I alluded to this a little bit before, but a proper diagnosis, why does it matter? Why can't we just go to Google? Because there are things that mimic, that make it seem like someone has ADHD, but maybe they don't. Now, I want to distinguish. There are things that coexist with ADHD, but there are also things that can make it seem like it's ADHD, but maybe it's not. Something like severe sleep apnea, post-traumatic stress, severe food allergies. By the way, if you're going to put your kid on a gluten-free diet, that will help if they have a gluten allergy. If they don't have a gluten allergy, it's not going to help them with their ADHD, right? We have to really be careful of what we're doing there. But so you want to make sure that you're ruling things out. Now, who can diagnose ADHD? Actually, a pediatrician, a neuropsychologist, a neurologist, a nurse practitioner. There's lots of different categories of people that can. So how do you know who to go to? You go to someone who is current and expert in ADHD, who does this all day long. And there are plenty of good providers out there, all right? What's involved in a diagnosis? Well, first and foremost, you must get a full family history. And that's why you can't just do these checkoff things. It's not enough. You need to understand the family system. You want to look at, rule out, as I said, some medical things. You want to have observation in 2 or more settings because kids are going to show up differently in different areas. And we have to understand the nuances and why, right? And there's a lot more I could say about that. But you really want to make sure you get a full, good diagnosis.
Cindy, can you, one of our listeners, or one of our participants asked, can you share some of the assessments or tests that are used for that diagnosis?
You know what? I'm going to skirt that question this way. Here are my disclaimers. I do not diagnose. I do not medicate. My job is education and support. I could probably name a bunch of them, but I'd be missing 1 or 2. And it's important to see how they're stacked up with one another. So I would say I'm going to defer that to other people for that answer. Okay.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I mean, if you email me, I could give you a whole list and everything else, but off the top of my head, I don't want to just leave important things out. Okay. But in terms of a treatment plan, sometimes medication makes sense. As I said, I am not in charge of medication, but I am here to help parents talk out those issues. These are very private, complex, fluid issues, right? I understand the journey of not wanting medication. I also am going to help you understand that medication in the right way can also be helpful. I'm going to support you either way, okay? Therapy can be helpful. My personal feeling is that ADHD is not a therapeutic issue. It is a neurobiological issue. So very often what people need is tools, strategy, support, education, understanding of all of this. And very often kids are not only resistant to therapy, but they also feel badly about themselves that they need therapy. Even though they shouldn't. In a perfect world, I think therapy is great for, we all could use a little, right? But so we have to think about what is the impact, what is the kid feeling and thinking about what their treatment plan is.
So one other question on diagnosis, Cindy.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, is there a way to ensure that ADHD isn't misdiagnosed for highly gifted kids? Because sometimes it can be, tougher in that
It's a
circumstance.
very good question. So I'll talk just a minute about the highly gifted kids. Remember we said about executive function, right? Executive function can be weak, intelligence can be strong. We call those kids twice exceptional. Their organization's 2E, right? Gifted, talented, things like that. In terms of diagnosis, a good diagnostician is not going to get thrown off by that, because a good diagnostician is going to look at the full picture of the child and not just the academic support, the academic performance. Okay. Coaching. Coaching obviously is my preference. I think that kids can benefit from coaching, but usually the young ones aren't quite ready for that thinking about what they're thinking about, that higher level thinking, which is why I feel that the parents are the ones that really need the support. Kids generally are ready. I've got coaches who work with high school and college kids, and it's very, very effective, right? Much younger than that, generally, I like to go through the parents. There's so much parents can do to support their kids, which is why I say parent education is essential, right? Number 3, your perspective. I like to have a disability perspective. Now, why? Who wants to think of their kids as having a disability? We don't. But that's why I put that in small letters. But I say this because we have to accept the realities of ADHD. There are challenges. You can't just say to your kid, listen, I know you have a slower processing speed, but can you just hurry up today because we got to get somewhere? It just doesn't work like that. And you know what? I know you're really bored with this work, but you got to show some enthusiasm. You got to just sit and stay focused. It doesn't work like that, right? We want to see their strengths and not just their weaknesses. I have a saying that I use all the time with my clients, which is what you pay attention to grows. What are you looking to grow, right? Don't just pay attention to it for your kid. Pay attention to it for yourself. See their strengths. Know that they're there. See the world through your child's eyes. Imagine what it's like for them all day being reprimanded, being corrected, even if you're doing it nicely and sweetly, right? They still know that they're doing something wrong, that they're missing the boat. And unconditional love to offset the reprimands and the reminders of their challenges. And my personal motto, and this is the introduction to my book, 8 Keys, parent the child you have. Not the child you thought you'd have, not the child you wish you'd have, not the child you'd have if your mother-in-law got her way, right? But the child you're blessed with, right? That's what's important. So that brings us to our parenting skills. Well, anyone here try logic? John, if you just sit down and get your homework done, you can go out and play with your friends. Anyone try that? Right? Or if you just calm down, I'll get you an ice cream cone. Does the kid calm down? No. It doesn't work. We parent from logic, from intuition, and it doesn't work. You've got a complex kid. You need different strategies. And extra love, I don't doubt that parents love their kids. I've got the most loving clients in the world, and their kids are defiant. Not because they're bad, mean parents, but because they haven't learned yet how to match their child's, needs. Patience is crucial, but even that's not going to be enough. And strictness and rules, parents are very often told, well, you have a kid with ADHD, you got to be really structured, have rules and boundaries and everything else. Well, you know what? Some of those rules are going to be triggering the kids. We have to figure out, how do we implement those rules? What are the rules that are appropriate for my kid? What's going to help them build skills and not just be punitive? So I think parents need a black belt in parenting. You need ADHD specific tips, tools, strategies, and of course, knowledge. All right. Let's talk about home. Well, life inside their heads is often very chaotic and messy, right? And they don't have that internal sense of time and order. They need a calm environment. Now, easier said than done, I know, but that's, again, one of the things we can work on. They need structure and consistency to reduce the stress and the chaos. But again, with that structure and consistency, it's got to be structure that makes sense with them, not to them, right? Not just on them. And they need support at the point of performance. What does that mean? That means when you're actually with them in the room. It's not enough to say, hey, Johnny, go, pack up your backpack and everything when he's up in the other room. He may nod or he may say yes, but you have no idea what he's doing. So while we're teaching skills, we need to be there. And oh, by the way, they are going to test the limits. Most of the kids that are in my practice are strong-willed. And that's not a bad thing, but it is a reality. So you have to have your limits and you have to know how to manage them.
Cindy, before you go on to the next one, there was one question I wanted to bring up, and that's, what's the difference between coaching and therapy?
Great question. So therapy, and I'm going to generalize here, therapy is more of a medical model. We're looking back. We're looking at the whole family system, and we're trying to figure out why things are happening. You could talk to a kid till they're blue in the face about why you're having trouble focusing. Having trouble focusing because of their neurobiology. Yeah. Coaching is about the here and now and moving forward. Coaches are here to give you tools, strategies, support, accountability, right? And coaches work with therapists. I very often will consult with the family therapist or the child therapist so that we're all working on the same page, but I'm going to be doing more raising awareness about why isn't this working? What kind of system might make more sense for you? Let's figure out, let's try this and see what's not. So we're getting more granular in a lot of ways, right?
That's great. That's great. And one last thing, since we're on a roll here, somebody asked, do the strategies that you're sharing, do they apply to both types of ADHD, hyperactivity and inattentive ADHD?
I'll go a step further. I'm going to say they apply to every kid and every adult. In fact, it's funny because in the group of professionals that I'm training right now to be parent coaches, we're partway through my Common Connected curriculum. And one of the coaches said, isn't this like good for all parents? I said, yeah, it is. These are ramped up parenting skills. That's why I say we all need to know how to parent. When you've got a child with challenges, we need ramped up. But the things that I work with hyperactive, impulsive, inattentive, all of it. Yeah. Now, in terms of your child's lens, what do they know about ADHD? Why do I ask this? Because a lot of times we don't like to use that label. So we don't talk about it. Please be aware, and I keep lowering the age that I say this. I used to say about 12 or 13. Now I say about 9 or 10. Kids hear it. And they hear it whether it's talked about them or about other kids, or they've looked on Google. So we want to help them. I always say, I want to control the narrative with my child. I want to be able to present what's valuable, what's important for them. Okay? So what do they know about ADHD? Teach them about their brain. There's lots of lessons I give about, the brain, the front of the brain, back of the brain, stress, all of that. How do they feel about having ADHD? There are wonderful books on my website for talking to kids about ADHD, and also books for kids about ADHD. I always suggest read the children's book first so that you're prepared before you read it with your child. Sometimes you may want to just use that language. But you don't want to hide it from them once they become old enough that they're aware that they're getting any kind of supportive services. How is their self-care? Things like nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Well, just like we were saying, Kyle, before, doesn't every kid need good nutrition, exercise, and sleep? Of course they do. But when you tend toward dysregulation more often, you even more so need to take care of yourself in these areas. What is your child's role in their treatment? Well, do they know how they learn best? Do they know what their rights are? If a kid has an IEP or a 504 plan, they should know pretty much what's on it. So because they're going to come home, they're not going to share what's going on in the classroom. We want to help them know what they are entitled to and what support is good. And we want them to feel okay about it. That's another whole thing we talk about with parents. How do we help kids feel comfortable with the support that they're being offered in school? Because a lot of kids don't want to look different. And I understand that. So we can't just say, yeah, but this will help you and just push them through it. We've got to connect with our child. This is a longer journey they're on. We want them, if they end up going to college and they need these services, we want them feeling totally comfortable going up to the professor and saying, hey, prof, you know what? I do better if I sit in this kind of seat, and I'm going to need some extra time. Here's my proof that I'm going to need the extra time. And you know, this and this might also help me be successful. I want them to stand tall and be able to say all of that. So that's why I say, can they advocate for themselves? And do they see their interests and talents and passions as gifts and possibilities to be nourished? Parents, one thing I will encourage you, please make time for your kids' passions. All right. I know academics takes them longer. It's not necessarily the academics that's going to get them feeling optimistic about their lives and moving forward. So we got to combine everything, which leads me to family balance. Your marriage and your family relationships. I know, having worked with so many parents through the years, that that marriage relationships do take a hit, because parents find that, well, we can't go out with that other couple right now because we got to figure out what to do about Johnny. And then the parents are disagreeing about what to do about Johnny. And I think parents can love each other and have very different parenting styles. So I always say, I don't do couples therapy. I do couples coaching. I help couples get on the same page and really hear each other in terms of how to parent this child. But you've got to nurture those relationships. You got to think about the other kids in the family, right? Sally, who doesn't have ADHD, may feel like, well, you spend so much time with Johnny, even though the time you're spending with Johnny is reprimanding him, dragging him to different doctor's offices, helping him with his homework and everything else. Sally just knows that you're not spending as much time with me. So we want to keep that in mind as well. So we can have special time with them, sometimes special talks, etc. You got to think about your own self-care, right? That whole idea of put the oxygen mask on yourself first. Your own emotional well-being. Are you keeping in touch with your friends? Or are you getting isolated right now? Many parents get too isolated. One of the things I love when I'm able to do my Common Connected workshop in person is when the parents all connect with each other, because now they have people that they really can relate to. And I think that's so valuable, right? All right, number 8 is the school connection. Know your rights. I'm not going to read this whole thing. And again, if you email me, I'm happy to send you the PowerPoint or, whoops, I didn't mean to go that fast on it. But basically, what this is talking about is just because a child is getting all A's in class does not mean that they may not need or deserve services at school. Academic performance should not rule out support at school. There's a lot more we could talk about that. I am not a professional advocate, but I want you to just at least have this information, okay? So, school connection, never go alone to meetings. Why do I say that? I'm not saying you have to bring a paid advocate. You could bring your friend, right? You could bring a sibling. These are emotional meetings. What happens when we get emotional? We don't hear things as well. We forget what we want to say. Things go too quickly. So just bring someone with you who can help slow down the whole process for you. Keep accurate records. For years, you don't know what your child's going to want to do later in life. Your child, who may be a very late bloomer, maybe wasn't that student, may decide 5 years out of high school that, gee, now they want to take the GMATs or the LSATs, or maybe they want to go to college. You're going to need to show records in case they're going to need services. All right. You can't just, start from where they are. Work with the teachers. And if you're having trouble working with the teacher, talk to the guidance counselor. The reason I say this is very often, unfortunately, it becomes this whole battle, right? By and large, teachers are good people, right? And by and large, they're doing the best they can too. But having said that, everyone's different. So remember, your kid is in that classroom all day long. You've got to have that relationship. Think about what are the appropriate accommodations your child needs, but include your child's insights, even if your child is very young. It's great to get all these services and have, your kid gets preferential seating so he gets to sit up front. That may be the kiss of death for your child. He may hate sitting up front. Talk to your child about it. Help them, again, raise their awareness about where do you sit best? Why is that a better seat for you? What would help you, because that way, as they get older and they do get to just choose where they want to sit, they're making helpful, appropriate choices.
Hey, Cindy, when it comes to schools, when somebody asked, is this really kind of the meeting process and such? Is it true for private schools as well?
Private schools are a little trickier. They are not under the rubric of IEPs and 504s. However, some will respect that, and some will just say, I'm sorry, we're going to funnel you out of this school. That's the reality. So every private school is different. Parents make the mistake of assuming that if they send their kid to a private school, they're going to get better and closer supervision and better support. But some of these schools are not set up for these kind of kids. So you've really got to be careful.
Thank you.
So in terms of circle of support, it really does take a village, which is what Kyle and his wife are creating right now, right? It really takes a village. But you are the chief and the head coach, right? You've got to put together that team. You are responsible to know sometimes more than the teachers do. That's just the reality. But you need your own support too. So make sure everyone is working on the same goal, which is raising a resilient and confident child, right? So parent the child you have, as I said at the beginning. You know your child best. Trust your instinct. Trust your voice. If something doesn't seem right, pursue it. And if the person you go to says, no, it's fine, it's just developmental, whatever, maybe get a second opinion. Your child knows themselves too, though. So believe their experience. Their experience is real. If they're saying, the tag on the back of my neck is driving me crazy, and you're saying, oh, it's not that big a deal. Well, you deal with like a knife in the back of your neck. Believe their experience, right? Pay attention to their gifts and their talents, because as I said before, these are the keys to help them feel confident and optimistic and motivated in their lives.
Absolutely.
Right? The challenges they have are real. Know that intelligence and potential do not always help them in the moment. Doesn't always help them in the moment. There's on my website, and if you can write this in the chat, maybe there's a free parent presentation that I have a recording of called Skills for Success that talks all about mindset and potential and how to help your kids have a strong, it's called a growth mindset, right? And help them accept and embrace the support services, as I said, right? Different's never easy, but we all need help sometimes to be our best. It is all about our relationship with our child. We can't be there to guide them if we're battling them. So I talk about, I'm just going to take another 2 minutes because I do want to open it up broadly, but I talk about a parenting wheel. In coaching, we use something called the wheel of life. And this wheel could be full of anything, right? You could do a wheel of life for yourself. In fact, if you want to send me an email, I can send you just my sheet about the wheel of life. But these are different parenting areas. And I want you to think about if this is your wheel and the center is 0 and the outside is 10, I want you to think about, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you in this particular area, right? If you're feeling like, my home, oh my God, it's like a 2, or I feel like, okay, we've got a good relationship, we need to see where do you need to work? What are the goals you're setting? So in terms of parent coaching, the goals of working with parents is first and foremost, let's reduce that stress. I mean, the stress level is way too high in some situations. I want to help parents establish effective and appropriate rules and expectations and boundaries that, as I said, are not triggering, but they're actually going to be supportive. We want to teach parents effective communication skills to use with each other and their children so that everyone feels heard. We want to teach parents effective discipline strategies. And also, how do I know if I'm enabling my kid or supporting my kid? Right? How do I know that difference? And we want to support parents with tools and insights to help their children learn self-regulation skills and reduce the impacts of their challenges. All right. I'm just going to put this up here as we open up the floor for questions. This is the workshop that I referenced. It's a 7-session workshop series. If you want to take just session 1 and then decide, that's the information on the right. I've got coaches doing this, every month or so. So if you ever need that support, we also can work with you one-on-one. But if you want to start with the workshop, it's a great place to get a good, solid understanding of parenting challenges and how to deal with it. All right. So Kyle, do we have other questions, or do people want to?
Yes, we do.
Questions? Okay.
You have some great questions. So first, thank you for sharing all that information. That was wonderful, Cindy. So one of our questions, is it certain that a parent would also have ADHD, or could it be a grandparent, or how likely is it to actually be hereditary?
Statistically, it's about 40%. Many people in the field feel that it's even higher, right? But we don't always know because, one of the things we say is, do you outgrow the ADHD or do you learn how to manage your life effectively? It's hard to see. So, but it is pretty highly hereditable. Let's just leave it there.
Great. And can you give some examples of how ADHD changes with the child as they age from adolescence to teenage years?
Yeah. In some ways, very often people will say that the hyperactivity, the physical hyperactivity will reduce, but don't forget there's also cognitive hyperactivity. So you've got a bombardment of thoughts. It's like I'm watching TV, but I'm listening to 5 channels. So many people will say it's not so much that their ADHD goes away, it's more that they've learned the tools and the strategies to manage it.
That's great. That's great. Do kids with ADHD have a higher occurrence of depression and anxiety, Cindy?
Yes. Statistically, because I certainly know all these statistics, I think it's about 17% coexisting condition with depression. But again, I will say, and I've seen this, we don't always know whether it's clinical depression or depression because they feel like a square peg in a round hole. Right? When they go to school or with their parents, where they feel like everyone's telling me to hurry up and I can't hurry up. There must be something wrong with me. And, they internalize that. So, but it's very important to realize that. Anxiety, though, I think is the hidden disability. I think anxiety is in the room with these kids all the time. Statistically, it's about, I think, 35 to 40%. I would say probably higher. But imagine if you feel like the world is going faster on you, everyone's expecting everything. It's just like everything is just too much. It's like they're just saying, like, get off. And that's why we see a lot of defiance, because what we're really seeing is their survival instinct. They're just saying, get off. I can't deal with this right now. So that's why that calm foundation that we work on is so essential.
That's great. Thank you. And then what about ODD, or oppositional defiant disorder? Mm-hmm. The question is, do a lot of the strategies you share or you shared today help with that?
I would say it's 100% yes. We see a reduction in the oppositional behavior the more parents understand and know how to work more effectively with their kids. That's one of the centerpieces of my work.
Awesome. And this is a question I get a lot too, Cindy, and that's, what sort of social skill issues or deficits are a tribute to ADHD? We have probably more than just this person who asked a question, but so many kids with ADHD have trouble making and keeping friends. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's understandable in that. And some of these kids are like the mayor of the town. I mean, some of these kids have no social issues, and that's why I say every kid is so different. But in terms of the social issues, if they feel like the world is going faster than they can handle it, they sometimes are looking to control their world. they're going to maybe want to be the banker when they play Monopoly and be more inflexible about certain things. They're good kids. They're caring, good kids. They just don't always have the skills to relate. So that's why it's so important to partner with them and help them understand the perspective of other people and give them the tools and the strategies to support them.
Absolutely. And along that lines, can you recommend maybe a strategy to help kids read the room?
Yeah, I would say those are great things to do. Reading the room is all about understanding how people are acting in the moment and noticing. I mean, and that's what one of the things you see in the workshop. We literally teach parents communication skills, and we literally help them teach their kids communication skills. So as they're doing that, they are starting to read what's going on in people around them. They're starting to reflect more and pause more and not just keep talking, right?
Yep. Awesome. Thank you. And, one person asked, can you explain why a child might remember lines for a play, probably something they're interested in, but can't learn how to use utensils when eating?
There could be multiple reasons for that. First of all, there's very different skills. One has motor coordination involved. One has memorization involved. But at the core of this, when you talk about ADHD, think of it this way. Remember I said you can see it on the brain? What we see on the brain is activation when you're intrinsically interested. So memorizing your lines, you might be so charged up and excited about it, your brain is lighting up. Remembering the utensils, it's like, what's the difference? Why does it matter, right? So you're not necessarily able to activate your brain in the same way.
Awesome. There's been several questions like this. I'm just going to address this. Question is, will the session be available for rebroadcast? So we will do a couple things. One, as a follow-up to this, tomorrow you will receive a recording of this webinar. In addition, you can find it on the YouTube channel at Guiding Bright Minds. I'll send a reminder of that out as well. As well as I'm going to include all the links that were dropped in the chat today, like Time Timer, and a link to Cindy's website and her workshops. So all that will be available upon sending that out tomorrow morning. A few more questions, Cindy. We got about 2 more minutes left. Here's another one. Are ADHD and autism related? Sometimes they seem to look alike.
They can look alike, and actually there's coexisting conditions. So there are some overlapping characteristics, but they are still two very different separate disorders. But there's a lot of overlap. Same thing with bipolar. A kid can look certain ways, but that's why that proper diagnosis is so important, because they're still very, very separate disorders.
Thank you, Cindy. And I think this will be the last question for today. Can you give examples of setting up non-triggering rules and boundaries? Is it in the delivery? It seems like to her, or to this person, that most of the rules seem like triggers.
That's a great question. And there's no simple answer, but there is really an answer. And it has to do with, and this is what we do in the work, there's a sequence to the workshop. I want you to just kind of notice that. I can't deal with consequences, boundaries, things like that, until I have calmed down the situation, built up a collaboration and a communication with my child. Because if they feel, these are the kids very often who want control in their lives. And we understand that they want control in their lives because everything feels so chaotic. So when we do it to them and don't include them, it becomes problematic. But then parents are going to say, well, I did include my child, but there's a way to include that's much more inclusive than a simple conversation. It's a little more complex than that, but it's so doable.
Awesome. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for your time today. This was so valuable, and thank you to all of our participants. We just thank you for all of your sharing your knowledge, and encourage everybody not only to go check out Guiding Bright Minds, but go check out PST Coaching.
PTS.
I'm sorry, PTS. Sorry, Cindy, I apologize. Must be my dyslexia. I'm looking right at it. Yeah, PTS coaching. She has some great workshops, as Cindy's been talking about, to help guide you in the process. And anything else you need, come check out guidingbrightminds.com. It's a place where you're going to find Cindy and many other professionals and tools to help guide you on your journey. So thank you all for being here. We hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon. Once again, Cindy, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.